Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Extremely Non-Extreme, a podcast brought to you by Principle-Based Politics. In this episode 4, our guests are Carl Zwisler and Veronica Schmidt Harvey. Carl is a lawyer who has spent his career practicing law from Washington, D.C., with specialties in franchising and distribution law and international business. He lives, as they call it, inside the Beltway. Veronica is a PhD organizational psychologist and consultant based in Phoenix, Arizona. She is one of the leading experts in the world in the field of learning agility, which she uses to help develop leaders and organizations. And so I'd like to start the way I have started other episodes by asking you both to describe how you label yourself politically, be it Democrat, progressive, liberal, resistance, populist, socialist, whatever label you attach to yourself. I'm sure the listeners will attach their own labels, but how do you describe yourself? We'll start with you, Veronica.
Sure. This may not be the clean-cut answer you're looking for, but you'll probably find that with me today. First of all, I describe myself ideologically as a scientist. I mean, that comes kind of first and foremost. But if, push comes to shove, I am registered as a Democrat. And by the way, this jacket color was purely by accident. That was not intentional. So I would say that's my political identity. But I really do think some of my value system spills over into the progressive realm. But my thoughts, fiscally can be pretty conservative. So it's hard to just pick one label.
Carl, how about you?
Well, I'm a longtime registered Democrat, and I generally favor democratic social policies.
Mhm.
But having represented businesses throughout my career, uh, I tend to have a business orientation as well, which sometimes, according to my children, makes me seem like a Republican. Uh, I should say that, I'm conservative in that sense. I'm conservative in the sense that I believe in the Constitution, due process of law, freedom of the press, and the right of all citizens to vote. I believe the government exists to protect citizens and to encourage peace and prosperity. Finally, I'd say I'm a pragmatist and a globalist.
Okay. Well, that's plenty of labels.
Yeah,
Very,
we have a
very
lot in
well.
common.
And I happen to know that you both are very smart people, which is one of the reasons I ask you to be guests here today. Our topic is going to be Democrats and
Mhm.
the Democratic Party after the Trump era, after Biden and Harris. And at the national level, the Democratic Party, as I see it, is in a deep hole. That's what I've written about in my blog the last 2 weeks, and I see that hole as getting deeper. This episode will explore that Democratic hole with two Democrats, and I expect Veronica and Carl will offer free advice to the Democratic Party for its long trek up and out. Carl, your vantage point comes to us from Washington, D.C. itself, and that is primarily my focus is federal politics, Washington, D.C. Do you agree with my premise that the Democratic Party is in a bad place right now?
Absolutely. I think any party that loses an election, and particularly when it loses all of Congress and the White House, is in a bad predicament, and that's happened to both parties. But in addition to the other labels I gave myself a minute ago, I'm also an optimist, and I think for reasons that we're going to discuss, there are a lot of reasons for optimism among the Democrats going forward.
Very well. Veronica, as a psychologist, how would you diagnose, if that's the right word, the mindset of your party? I've heard Democratic friends of mine talk about being depressed, gloomy. What's your view from where you come from as a professional?
Sure. Well, as a professional and really just, I think maybe personally, I mean, I think a lot of the Democrats that I interact with are concerned. I think any sense of hopelessness you may sense is how to, work and operate in a world where truth doesn't seem to matter as much as it should. And so trying to figure out a way to move forward with some of the logic and ways of working that we've had in the past is challenging. But I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I guess like Carl, I'm a bit of an optimist. I don't spend a lot of time reading polls, but I happened upon one that indicated that Democrats are more motivated to vote than 72%, like more so than even the 2024 election, way more so than Republicans are. And when you look at the stats related to just satisfaction with their party, Democrats are a little less satisfied, like 28%, but Republicans aren't much farther ahead. I mean, the CNN poll showed them at 33%. So the bottom line, I think, is the message I'm hearing, nobody's really happy with the way things are being led. And so I've got a little bit more to share with you on mindset because I think it does relate to some fundamental differences in the way that Republicans and Democrats think. But I'll pause with that for now.
Well, if you were asked to
Mhm.
consult with the Democratic leadership, and I know you do consulting with leadership of large organizations, if you were asked to consult with the Democratic Party about this, how would you suggest they can turn around the electoral problem that they experienced in 2024?
Again, I am not a political scientist or a political psychologist. There are actually such things. So I'm going to look at it from the lens of being, a business, a leadership psychologist. And one of the things that we do is spend a lot of time focusing on, personality, what makes people operate and default the way they do. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but there's a concept called the Big Five on personality. That lots of research has ultimately boiled it down to five factors that capture a lot of the evidence around the way people behave. And Democrats and Republicans tend to be different. I don't want to overly generalize. Generalization can get you in trouble. But the biggest difference is on a dimension called openness to experience. And Democrats tend to be much more likely to you embrace change, like change, see new ideas and diversity as fundamentally good. Republicans tend to score lower on that dimension. Another dimension where there's difference is conscientiousness, where Republicans really value structure, order, having clear answers, whereas Democrats, are a little less strict about that. They're a little more open to flexibility. So I think you really have to. I think this is one opportunity that's really been missed is trying to appeal to some of those differences. And so what I see driving a lot of the behavior on the Republican side is fear. I think we can all agree that change is happening faster than ever before. In fact, I don't remember this. I get lots of things that pop into my email, but one this morning was like how to lead others when the world is falling apart. And that was literally the headline for a business blog post. And so I think if you're feeling constantly threatened, you're in danger, that creates fear and anxiety. And I think to be our current administration has totally played on that. So one part of the answer, I think, is understanding what's driving so much fear and creating a strategy that people clearly feel is addressing those fears. And that starts with listening. So I think my number one thing on the list of action items would be to do some deep listening. That's what we do as consultants, as psychologists, and I think that's where it should start here as well.
Okay. Carl, other than Donald Trump falling off his metaphorical throne or his party losing popularity as he becomes less important, what do you see bringing about a Democratic resurgence in 2026 and 2028, our next two federal elections?
In two words, Donald Trump. Let me explain. Veronica said, and I was listening carefully, Veronica, that Republicans tend to fear change. So if they fear just like change, they have been in for quite a ride for the last few months.
Mhm.
And I think that same impact has been felt even more so by Democrats. my theory that I have espoused to my dear wife, who is also a Democrat, who says, I can't believe it, I can't believe what's happening every day, is every time there is a new revelation, I say, good.
Hmm.
Trump has done something horrible again. And my
Hmm.
thesis is that the more he bullies, the more he attacks people, uh, he offends voters. And every time he takes one more antagonistic step, he is going to alienate 1%, maybe 2% of his current voter bloc. And he's done that with health care, with tariffs, with measles, with FEMA, the weather service, voting rights. You go on and on and on. And everything he does is not so much the objective of what he's trying to accomplish. He may be trying to accomplish fairness, but the way he goes about it in a way that is bullying, ignoring contracts, ignoring social mores is upsetting a lot of people. And the more he does of that, the more I think he's going to drive away, whittle by whittle, uh, a substantial part of his base. So the real challenge, I think, for the Democrats is to take advantage of this and assert some leadership. And I know we're likely to talk more about that in a little bit later, but that's my position on it for right now.
Carl, that's an excellent point. And I think that you made me think of something I hadn't really thought about before. But one of the concepts that I've been concerned about is people have just a natural immunity to change. Once they've made their mind up about something, in fact, I read one study where people were presented with a piece of policy and they made their decision purely on whether their party voted for or not, nothing related to what was in the substance of the policy. So, but I think if you do, like you said, chip away at it, if more and more of these things impact people individually, no one thing may affect everyone, but everybody's eventually going to be affected by something that hurts them personally that might tip them over. So I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see it. It's going to affect not just individuals, but their families.
Hmm.
If you can't get health care, or if you're one of those 11 million people or whatever the number is who can't get Medicaid and you need
Hmm.
it, or you can't get food stamps, or you can't
Hmm.
get food, what's going to happen to those people?
Hmm.
And if they're your family members or your neighbors, you're going to be impacted by that. And I
Right.
think that's going to generate some kind of a response.
So those answers seem to be Trump focused. And
Uh-huh.
maybe that is the answer. As I said before, all politics are Trump politics in this modern day and age. But if we ever get to the point where Trump is less relevant than he is today in politics,
Hmm.
uh, and I am arguing that 2026 will be the start of that time. The election in 2026 will be less about Trump, and
Hmm.
2028 certainly should be less about Trump because he's not going to be on any of those ballots. So
Hmm.
I have been arguing that the Democratic Party needs to uh, decide what it stands for other than opposition to Trump. And I quoted a poll in my blog that said 65% of voters polled in mid-February of this year agreed with the statement no one has any idea what the Democratic Party stands for anymore other than opposing Trump.
Hmm.
Carl, isn't it key to decide what your party stands for besides its position on what Trump has done or hasn't done?
Well, I think the easy way, it's easy to say you're opposed to everything that Trump has done, but I think going through a laundry list of those is both impractical and unworkable. I do agree with you that the Democrats in the past, other than Joe Biden in his first race, have not really been advocates of significant changes or policies. We saw that with Hillary Clinton. We saw it in the last presidential race, where everything was against Trump. And what are you for? Well, more than just saying that I'm against everything that Trump wants to do, or I'm for everything that Trump's against, which I think is stupid. Uh, I I hate to use the word, especially with you, Quentin, but I think Democrats should stand for certain principles,
Mhm.
and those principles uh, would be things that would unite, presumably, the party behind them as they try to find a principled way of addressing the problems. Well, let's assume we have a problem with immigration. I don't think anybody disagrees that we've had a problem with immigration. People have come up with proposed solutions to that for at least 20 years. This year, we've had the Trump approach to it, which is massive assaults on immigrant communities and deportations. There are other ways to approach that. So,
Mhm.
if I were to address the immigrant situation or problem as it's laid out to be, I would say I am in favor of a fair immigration policy. I'm in favor of the Constitution, which grants people due process of law. That means that they should not suffer any legal disability until they have been told what they are accused of doing and have a right to have a lawyer with them and to present their case in a court.
Mhm.
I don't think there's anything un-American about that. In fact, I think it's fundamental American practice, and it's something that I think all conservative should believe.
Right.
And so, on issues, such as that, uh, I think there are many principles.
Mhm.
One of the fundamental issues that strike me as a globalist, which I said I was earlier, is what has the Trump administration's practices and policies done to the position of the United States in the world? It used to be we were the leader. People looked up to the United States for our principles of government, balance of power, due process of law, our equality of voting, et cetera, and what we aspired to be. Now we're seen as bullies.
Mhm.
We are seen as a country that has allowed our president to ignore uh, international agreements of all kinds of trade agreements, even
Mhm.
ones that he's negotiated with Canada and Mexico during his last term. He suddenly says, I'm not going to pay any attention to that. And because I don't like you, I'm going to impose a 50%, 150%, 500% tariff.
Mhm.
And that undermines our credibility in the world. It undermines our ability to make agreements. As Quentin would surely tell you as a lawyer, if you have a client and he wants to negotiate a deal with somebody else, but you don't trust that somebody else because they have a history of going back on their word, you will refrain from doing a deal with him if at all possible, and you certainly won't give him the benefit of the doubt in any negotiations. I fear that's where we are going right now.
Right.
So,
Let me ask Veronica, uh, would you advise the party to adopt a new, more fulsome platform and approach than what hasn't worked in 2024 in particular?
Well, again, Carl mentioned, he brings a business perspective, and I find myself often wondering. I know government is different. I'm not saying a leader in the public sector, the private sector would work in the government, but there's certain fundamental things. In fact, I just got done wrapping up a project where the organization starts first and foremost with identifying what their core values are. What are the things they're going to stand for no matter what? It's going to be sacrosanct. It doesn't matter if they lose money. They're things they're going to look, for example, safety of their employees. That was number one on the list. So that's the starting point. And so I guess I would advise Democrats that needing to get clearer on what those are to people is a starting point. But then, and part of that comes from listening and making sure those values really resonate with others. And and then from there, having a strategy that truly makes sense. Again, that is going to address those values. I think, as Carl said, right now we're seeing this, chainsaw approach to issues and problems that we all know are real. And, if if a corporation addressed things this way, they would not last long. They would lose their employees. It's not a logical way to approach things. So, I mean, getting people, the next step a good leader in a public or in an organization would do is identify who are the best people out there to work on this problem, whether it's internal, whether it's external. Bring the right team together, support them as a team. Don't and don't create competition except with the true enemy. And right now we've got competition going on in the country that's serving no one well.
For sure.
Yeah, again, if I could, Quentin or Veronica, made me think of another point, and it's not so much that we, as Republicans or Democrats, disagree on goals. Eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse in government. I've never heard any politician say, "I'm in favor of that."
Right.
It doesn't happen.
Or I'm in favor of totally just open the borders.
That's right. And so the question is, what is a reasonable approach to dealing with these things? In the United States right now, waste, fraud, and abuse, we have in every department an inspector general who is tasked with finding out how the agency is operating and whether it's operating in compliance with the laws or whether it's being wasteful. We have the general used to be accounting office, GAO. And it's charged with supervising government and doing reports to determine whether they are acting efficiently. We have the Office of Management and Budget that is charged with reviewing the proposed budgets and compliance with the budgets by various departments and agencies. We have oversight committees in Congress. We have appropriations committees in Congress. We have strategies that are established throughout government to deal with waste, fraud, and abuse. Have they always succeeded? Of course not. There have been problems, and there will always be some problems. But the Democratic approach should be, we just don't eliminate an agency because we found some fraud someplace, or we think we can do things more efficiently. You don't lop off 20% or 40% of their employees as an answer. You find a way to target what the problem is and come up with a reasonable, efficient resolution.
Yeah.
I think the Democrats have to have a reasonable, rational approach like that.
And I like what you said earlier about principles. I think people vote fundamentally on principles, but I have read many analyses by people with experience in politics that what people really make decisions based on is things like their personal outcomes, the perception of the voter as to how their mortgage rate will be affected by who votes, what their prices will be at the grocery store, whether they will have good employment, whether their taxes will be low or high, whether they'll have stable retirement account balances, whether they will live in peace and can raise their family in a peaceful world, and their, of course, health and general well-being. Those are the things. Veronica, you're a psychologist, and I suppose you understand much better than I do how people think. How do you believe voters make decisions on which ballot oval to fill in when they're in the voting booth?
That's not an easy question. If I really fully understood how all people think, I would probably be a very, very rich woman. But as you were talking, it deeply saddens me, and I think this is part of where you see some of the malaise with Democrats too, is that it's just deeply saddening to see people vote so much more purely in their self-interest. I mean, I definitely heard people say, I don't like Trump. I don't like what he stands for. I don't like anything about him, but I had to because of XYZ. In fact, I had a friend say it was because of my husband's business. So I don't know how we get around that, but there does seem to be more of an isolationism. I think one of the things that people in the rural communities maybe have going for them is a stronger kind of sense of community, in that you understand how your role affects everybody else's. I think some of that gets lost in the big urban areas. So I know I'm not answering your question, but I don't think people are anywhere nearly as logical overall as we give them credit for. I've read some research that it can be influenced, by things like who won a sports game the day before. It's crazy. And I think sometimes we underestimate the amount of time other people give to even following what's going on. And so I think what may often happen, and I'm speculating, is that people vote along with others like them. I'm going to vote like my friends do, like my family does, like the rest of my tribe does, without even really knowing what they're doing. And it takes a lot of courage for people, especially living in smaller rural areas, to break away from that and say, hey, I'm not doing that, because being ostracized or cut off in a big city is not a big thing. If you're cut off in a small town, that's a whole nother story.
I hear you. Yeah. So I'm wondering, isn't it possible for politicians, not just the Democratic politicians, but to speak to these issues, these
Mhm,
kitchen table issues, like putting food on the table for a reasonable price and having a
mhm,
job that provides for your family,
mhm,
this kind of thing. Carl, even in the Beltway, wouldn't it be possible for politicians to say out loud how they are going to address those problems with policies that they will enact if they are in office, and that their party generally stands for those policies, and the why being how they will affect people's personal outcomes? Is that possible?
I think anything's possible, but I think given the amount of time between now and the midterm elections, unless some leadership emerges very quickly, I don't know that we're going to see it.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm.
I do think that it, the voters vote in their own self-interest, and as they said during the Clinton campaign, it's the economy, stupid.
Yeah, yeah.
It is going to affect you, and you vote on what you think is going to affect you personally, and that's, you may call it, pandering or whatever, but that's what every politician tries to do, is say you're going to be better off. And I think one of the principal questions that the Democrats have to pose as they're proposing some broad-based solutions is, are you better off now than you were 2 years ago?
Mhm,
Will you be better off next year if things keep going in the same direction they are?
mhm,
And then you can go through a list of whatever issues that you think are most compelling at the moment. We've named some already, and say this is what we're for, or this is how we would change.
mhm.
But I think overall, in preparing for this, uh, I think Quentin, you described this program to me as my views as somebody who doesn't know anything, but a member of the public on the street. And I'm certainly not a party leader. I'm not involved in party politics. Uh, Although I was a lobbyist for 10 years, I've started PACs. I've been involved in the regulatory and political process, throughout my career. But I don't know the answers to all of these questions.
Mhm.
But in preparing for this today, I wanted to see how many lawsuits are now pending against the administration over executive orders.
Mhm.
And the quick answer I got was hundreds.
Yeah.
And any one of those could be an issue that affects somebody, for better or worse. But
Mhm.
but selecting from any one of those is going to be ignoring the other several hundred that
Mhm.
are of interest to people. So
Mhm.
I think the challenge is really going to be to focus on a few principles.
Mhm.
Faith in the Constitution, separation of powers, the right to vote, uh, the right to due process of law, honoring international commitments, taking care of the sick, using science to shape our healthcare system, and doing research and development in science and other areas. I mean, I would advocate for those areas. Exactly how you do that on a broad-based basis, I'm not quite sure.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's important the why of politics, and people, I believe, can sense why are you running for office, and why is your party uh, saying the things that it says, and why is your party trying to win this election? And so I have this theory that if people think the Democrats are really only want revenge on MAGA or payback against Donald Trump, I guess flipping the owning the libs that Trump's people wanted, and now the libs want to own MAGA or Trump. If that's the why, the motive for the Democratic Party wanting to win elections, I think people will sense that. But I could be wrong, and I may be misjudging voters' motives. Veronica, do you think voters can sense the motive of a politician, whether that politician really wants to serve them or has some other ulterior motive?
I'd like to say yes, but we as humans have so many built-in biases, and if you just gauge superficial behavior, there are very few of us who can estimate with accuracy. I mean, that's why there is such a thing as con men out there. But I think what further exacerbates it, and your theory is the why, which I think is true, but I think part of the problem is that people live, and I mean this is no news, they live in their own information bubble. So I honestly think back, I think that there is a long-term root cause of a lot of our issues. And I don't remember the year it was, the Fair Doctrine Law. You guys are lawyers. You probably can tell me better. It was is it in the 80s or whatever?
The
When,
fairness doctrine.
yeah, where you didn't have to put forth both sides of the story. And so now people only hear one channel of information, confirmation bias, they're going to look for it. I think people, because of the way the news and information sources work, they've lost their ability to even decide for themselves um, uh, what anything means. They listen to the same channels and the same people, and they don't get out of that bubble. And that probably scares me more than anything, because I mean, unless we go back to putting that kind of legislation in place, I don't know how we're going to get out of that. You can only inoculate people against misinformation so much.
And then there's social media bubbles, and I don't think there are any effective regulations on those. So
Mhm.
you're right. People see a lot of things and they
Yeah.
hear,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I
take.
think broadcast and cable news and the impact that it's having on Americans and American voters is diminishing substantially. I mean, we just heard about the late night show on CBS being
Mhm.
canceled. Why? Because they're losing money. Not enough people watch it. And that's happening in news organizations, the traditional news organizations as well. So, and people can use the internet to look for whatever source of news or information they want. And that is a shame.
Yeah, I think people have lost. I've lost. I listen to very little news because I've lost confidence in it being real news versus just infotainment. Yeah. But again, going back to one thing that Quentin, you and I have talked about before, is that I think intent, it has to be real. And one thing that just continues to puzzle me is how we can have science in place that helps us identify who is more equipped to be a great leader. And we use that because that's what I get paid for. And yet we don't do that in government. I mean, organizations focus on, having a leadership pipeline where they're building and developing people over time to have the right talent. I talked earlier about having, the values and the strategy. And so the right leader isn't always, it's not one person. It might be based on the time in the business. So you have to look at what the challenges are faced and see how that person's capabilities match up with those challenges. And then you don't just use gut feeling. Most people don't know, but an interview is about the same accuracy rate as flipping a coin. So if you're going to rely on that level of flip a coin science, you know, it's going to be purely by luck that we get good leaders. So I really feel like we should be doing more in terms of doubling down on how we identify, prepare, leaders for the long term to serve in public. And you've got to start by identifying whether that's right for them. I mean, what's the real advantage? You're going to get sacrificed, over the altar of public media if you run for office. You're not going to get paid much. The best people to be leaders probably aren't going for that.
Yep. So I have a tactical question I'd like to throw out to both of you. And I think Democratic candidates and the Democratic Party as a whole need to face this question.
Mhm.
And that is, how much should the party and its candidates cut ties with, or the more nasty way to say it would be run away from the past of the party. I think of Bill Clinton, who was labeled a new Democrat, and I think he liked that label. Barack Obama also ran on a promise of abrupt change from the past. He was a change candidate, if there ever was one. Either answering purely as voters or the professionals that you are in your fields, if you two comprised the strategy team of the Democratic Party or a particular candidate, how would you see a break from the past? Veronica, I'll ask you first.
I think it goes to a lot of what we've been talking from. I wouldn't see it as a complete break from the past, but I think it would be about regaining clarity on those principles, those values that we stand for, and then being clear on what the changes are that are needed in the world we're living in today. So I think it's sticking with the values and principles and getting even more clear on what our foundation is, but then being very clear with the strategy that addresses the problems of today and being very clear in both the vision and the roadmap for getting there. That would be my guidance.
I think Trump definitely pushed for a break from the past
Mhm.
for the 4 years past.
Mhm.
Trump's basic argument was in 2024, things were a lot better when I was president
Mhm.
before, weren't they?
Mhm.
Okay,
No.
agree with me on
Yeah.
that. Joe Biden has made things worse. Therefore, go back to me. And I should have been president this whole time. He couldn't get off his point about the prior election having been
Right.
stolen. But putting that aside, not that he did, go back to me. Give me
Mhm.
the second term I should have had. So he kind of had a strange break from the last 4 years of the past, but wanting to go back. Uh, I don't picture the Democratic Party in 2026 or 2028 said we need to go back to the way things were. I think the party needs to go forward. But Carl, your advice is requested on the topic of breaking from the past.
Well, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think the Reagan question to Jimmy Carter stands. Are you better off now than you were 2 years or 4 years ago? And that is not breaking with the past. It's looking at the past and looking at how you feel now and then. And I don't think the Democrats have to lie about what the situation is right now, and they don't have to make people any more uncomfortable about their current situation as they perceive it than they already are. But I think that's the fundamental question of the next election. Are you better off on any number of levels?
Mhm.
And
Obviously,
there, I think the Democratic Party has a leg up
Mhm.
in that we, as members of the public, consistently in polls express dissatisfaction with the direction of the country.
Mhm.
And I think a strong argument can be made that
Mhm.
things are bad now in the Trump 2 era.
Mhm. Mhm.
Your prices are even higher than they were before. Your mortgage rates are higher than they've been in a long, long time, etc.
Mhm.
Uh, that seems backward looking, but I agree with you, Carl, that that is the question of the day. Are you
Mhm.
better off than you were 4 years ago? I have a feeling Trump voters will say, absolutely, boy, things were terrible under Biden. Uh, but
Well, that kind of comes full circle back to where I started anyhow, is if we can't agree on truth, what do we have?
Right.
Yeah, if
Last
we
year
can't agree
during
on
the
facts.
election, I always got a kick out of it that stock markets were at all-time highs.
Hmm.
And many other economic indicators were extremely strong during the Biden
Hmm.
presidency.
Right.
But when he tried to claim Bidenomics, a strong argument can be made that's what cost him popularity. And ultimately, then when Kamala Harris wouldn't diverge from Bidenomics or say that she would, um, she
Hmm.
lost.
Hmm.
So uh, it was it a Kamala Harris a messaging problem? I heard a Republican say last week, or no, it was a Democrat in last week's podcast saying that the Democrats' problem is the messaging. Uh,
Hmm.
Carl, what do you think of that, or is it the candidates themselves that Democrats need to come up with better than they had in the last round?
Well, I think they have to have a message. Although curiously, uh, my analysis of why Trump read is because he was against everything. Everything was wrong. You know, the country is a disaster.
Hmm.
As you said, there were many contrary indicators on that, but there are certain things that obviously upset enough people that caused him to win the election.
Yeah.
Uh,
He should be his new book shouldn't be The Art of the Deal. It should be The Art of Creating Fear.
he does it, but that was the point. Thank you for reminding me, Veronica. The But Trump ran against basically the prior administration, and he ran against woke and whatever that means. And I think to a certain extent, Democrats don't have any choice but to argue against certain things, but they also have to talk about the economy, the issue that you raised earlier. So if you have tariffs that are going to purportedly increase the cost of living by $2,500 per year for every American family, a Democrat could certainly say, I will unbundle these tariffs in a fair way to reduce that burden on American families,
Mhm.
all the while maintaining smart investment in industries that's going to help to develop uh, the security of this country and provide a better economic base for the people who work here or want to work here. So I think there are opportunities.
We've talked about the what and the why, and my next question, and I think we can close on this general topic, is who? My governor, Tim Walz, the vice president choice of Kamala Harris, and he appears to be running again for the governorship of my state, Minnesota, in 2026. And I would say he is trying to position himself to run for the presidency in 2028. He was asked recently who can lead the Democratic Party going forward. I think this was on CNN. And he had a long pause. And after that long pause, he said, the voting public. Now, to me, I didn't care for that answer because I interpret it as we'll do polls and whatever positions poll best, we'll say we stand for that. And then whoever can articulate those positions best, again, according to the polls, that'll be our leader. That doesn't cut it, in my opinion. Carl, do you have any way too early advice on who the next leader of the Democratic Party can be, or at least what type of candidate should be put forward?
I think it has to be somebody who is articulate and somebody who has the support of a substantial number of voters. I do not have a particular candidate in mind. I've never been involved in party politics. I see people trying to jockey now and then. Because I've voted Democratic and contributed, I get all of the fundraising, or I was getting all the fundraising pleas many times a day until I cut it off recently. I just can't stand it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
get it from the other side too, and like, come on already. But I think somebody has to stand up and say, this is what we're going to do, and get a coalition of people to support. the most important things to people, and some of your decision about what's the most important thing to talk about seems to me to be those things that we're talking about or that are of most importance to most people. And to me, that includes voting rights. I think it has to do with constitutional principles, uh, the right to the courts and respect for the judiciary, and hopefully the judiciary will continue to earn it. Uh, I think we have to argue about America's role in the world in the future and our ability to control the peace for us and for all of our civilization. I think we have to talk about uh, healthcare and everything from accessibility to healthcare for all of us who need it, how to pay for it, and research and development on drugs, using science to make decisions about what healthcare options should be made available, what vaccine should be made available, whether we should have fluoridated water, et cetera. So I think there are plenty of things that a Democratic leader can rely upon that I think people are concerned about. And that should give them the impetus to go forward. But these things can change on a day's notice. But that's where I stand today.
Well, and Carl, I agree. I think I agree with you pretty much 100% on those things. But I think I'll go back to the point that maybe too many assumptions have been made without listening deeply enough about what really matters. I mean, Carl, you're an attorney. I'm a psychologist. I get to work with some really elite companies. I'm not out there working on the assembly line or waitressing just enough to. So I don't know if we're listening closely enough to a broad enough constituents to really narrow in on what matters the most. I mean, it's just like, again, I'll keep going back to a business, but you have to set priorities. And so what are the priorities that are going to serve us first, both short term and long term? I think too, and this goes back to this idea of in 4 years, is it all going to be retribution? I was reading an article this morning about, can you imagine if we're just boomeranging back and forth every 4 years? Some things take longer than 4 years to do. I mean, I'm working with the Japanese company and I just continue, even after working with eight, I marvel at how long term they think. Thinking from quarter to quarter is just not in their DNA. And so it may take some convincing of people that some of these things don't happen overnight, that, you may not derive the benefit, but your grandchildren may derive the benefit. And that's going to be uphill.
Long-term benefits are difficult to sell in,
Yeah.
in an election.
Yeah.
Just another observation for me personally, when you look at scores of issues that the candidates talk about,
Mhm.
I mean, you can't keep all of those in mind. They're not
Right.
all as important to you.
Mhm.
And I think ultimately it comes down to a question of trust. Do
Mhm.
do you trust this particular candidate to do the best thing for you and for America?
Mhm.
And somehow that sense of trust arises both from, party history and what people are saying, the way they've behaved in the past. Uh, Ultimately, I just don't think most of us can go through a checklist and say, this one goes to this
Right.
candidate, that one,
Right.
when that's just
Right.
not how
Well,
we work.
we don't have the time. I mean, can you imagine if you were evaluating a doctor and you had to be able to assess how good they were at every aspect of, what they do in diagnosing your health and treating it?
Well, maybe we could get AI to cast our votes for us.
It crossed my mind.
So,
Yeah.
Veronica, I have a last question for you. And I think about your profession and your consulting work. I
Mhm.
imagine as an industrial organizational psychologist, you help companies pick leaders.
Mhm.
And I think about psychological tests you could
Mhm.
give leaders before you, the board of directors, decided to hire them, or other batteries of psychological work that could be done. And we end up with uh, Joe Biden, who
Mhm.
had his issues, and
Mhm.
Donald Trump, who has his
Mhm.
issues.
Yeah.
And I imagine that would make the board of directors of any company furious with themselves if we
Hmm.
presented those two choices. How do you think leaders should be selected for these important roles in an ideal world? And I'm an idealist. So
Well, again, I know we're not going to get an ideal world by tomorrow, but as I mentioned earlier, I think it's a shame that we don't apply, more science to the selection of leaders. And again, the assessment of leaders is not by any means a perfect science. But you can certainly do better. I mean, I would even start with some fundamentals that are used for hiring, frontline people in high risk jobs. Can you pass a physical that will allow you to withstand the physical elements of a job like the president, which is pretty grueling? Do you have the mental capacity? I mean, can you pass a criminal background check? I think those should be, what we call the knockout factors for hiring a frontline worker. I think that'd be a place to start. I mean, how can we have allowed a felon to have gained the highest leadership office? And that wouldn't happen in a business. Not at least in a publicly traded company that I'm aware of. Maybe it does happen and they hide it, but I don't think so. But then, you certainly could get much more nuanced in terms of identifying, do they have a true service orientation, or are they purely motivated for, self gratification, self need? I mean, those are things you can get at with assessments. Is their personality one that fits the nature of the role that needs to be done? So I think we're a long way off from that being that happening, but I think we could take some baby steps forward with just even basic screening criteria before things even went to voters.
at least we as voters can have those thoughts and envision ourselves
Yeah,
the board of
yeah,
directors of a
right.
Fortune 500 company, the largest
Exactly.
Fortune
Well,
500 company ever, picking
and
their leader.
and I'll just add one other thing here. I think, and I encounter this quite a bit in my work with coaching and developing leaders. I think there are a lot of people who've grown up with this mental model of leadership as being this authoritarian figure that tells you what to do, the military model. And I'll tell you what, that does not work in business anymore. I think about the only place it does work is if you're in the midst of an emergency and you need somebody to tell you the way out the door. That's when authoritarian leadership comes in. But I think what's happened, and again, this goes back to the fear, is that this sense of the world is falling, and the only thing that can save us is somebody who can take charge right now. That's what kind of drives an attraction to an authoritarian leader to begin with. So it kind of again circles back to that reducing the fear.
I think we'll have to close on that note. We have had a wonderful conversation today, and I want to thank you both for participating in it. Next week on episode 5, my guests will be two Republicans. And we will have a similar discussion about how the Republican Party should move forward in the post-Trump era. And I hope we have as profound and as helpful conversation as we've had with you two, Veronica Schmidt Harvey and Carl Zwisler. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program today, and thank you both for your excellent insights.
Thank you, Quentin. You're a great moderator.
Been great fun, and sounds like the next episode is a do not miss one.
Thank you.